What is the most horrific event that you have personally witnessed? During my forensic medicine rotation in med school, when I was attending an autopsy, I got a text from my friend saying she couldn't make it to her class because a guy jumped in front of a train one stop before hers and all underground trains were stopped until they could deal with the aftermath. Hours later they bring in a fresh body in several separate bags. It was the guy that committed suicide. I'm not very sensitive when it comes to gore, even for someone in medicine. But I can't forget the image of his decapitated head looking at me from the table they set it on. Had to excuse myself and go outside to get some fresh air, and immediately abandoned forensic medicine as my second choice of specialty after that. How the hell do you autopsy that? Like I know what killed him. It was the train which decapitated him. I don't need to open him up to see if an organ failed. It's probably just a formality. I would think you'd need a doctor to look over every body or else a suspicious cause of death could go undiscovered. My mom and I had ran to the store and when we came home realized our dog had given birth. All the puppies were dead. Not just dead but somewhat decomposed. My mom picked a puppy up and started rubbing all over it with a cloth and its skin started to come off. She was crying hysterically and the dog was running all over the house getting black goo all over everything. It was horrific and took forever to clean. Poor dog. Puss had been dead inside her for a bit I guess. It was so sad. She did end up living though. Had to have her in the vet for days. She ended up taking one of my flip-flops when we got home and acting like it was a puppy. That ending made me sad. Former doc from the infantry pulled a guy from a burning Humvee when the floor panels had nearly amputated both his legs above the knee. Had to tear him off his own legs or leave him to burn to death. He bled out before evac arrived. Had to do a surgical critch on a guy that took shrapnel in the mouth. Had to put Miney on his forehead and use Smile Etherman to make a really ugly hole then stuff a cut down head tube in him. He lived. But it was a brutal scar. I had only ever done it in the goat lab. Covered for another medic in by app when we received a prison transfer from the hospital. Guy got shot in the asshole evading troops after planting an IED. He got a colostomy and after healing was transferred for a series of interrogations. My job was to do pre and post interrogation exams to prevent any physical abuse or torture. This guy kept having a prolapse from his colostomy. It was inflamed and infected. After a few days of antibiotics and SAIDs, he started getting better. One morning it got way worse. He was very dismissive of why it got worse and the terp was skeptical of his answers. So after lights out, the guard and I put on NVGS to watch him. This dude would detach his bag and let the other detainees pound his colostomy hole for cigarettes. The guards started calling him the colostitute. Bruh, what the duck, that last one. If read medical related AskReddit threads before and seen discussions about just how common it is for people to get STDs in their colostomy stoma. We were playing on Discord when my friend's father died. I listened frozen to the howls of the family and them trying to give CPR. It ducked me up a little. Edit. Spelling. My ex-girlfriend's brother committed suicide on his birthday. Valentine's Day. His parents went to the store to get him a cake. Upon arriving home they had a message on the machine that he had killed himself at a friend's house with a cake at the dinner table. I watched family members pulling their own hair out, screaming in horror. 4 weeks. Cries and howls of pure anguish. Oh god. Oh god, oh god, no. Oh my god. No. It makes me cry now. It will forever haunt me. The most pain I've seen. The cake stayed in the freezer for a year. After about 3 days I remembered he had a kitten in his room. No one could get themselves to go in his room. So I did. The window was open and the room was cold. I assumed the cat jumped out the window. I looked all over and almost gave up. The cat was under a pile of clothes on the bed. Alive. He had eaten an old half-eaten hamburger in the trash. Ate all of it but the onions. A year later the youngest brother was not taking the loss well and was spiraling into depression and suicide. The whole family started drinking. It was a snowball effect after that. My dog died a week after the year of the suicide. And my girlfriend of 8 years was no longer the girl I knew. Alcohol and pills became priority for her and her family. The rejection hit, and I was out of work. I then found myself depressed and full of thoughts of suicide. My girlfriend started not coming home. Coming home with people I didn't know. She'd become very cold and didn't love me anymore. I got a call from a friend saying my girlfriend was cheating on me. Soon after was confirmed. Got a job and sold all of my stuff. Then moved out on my own. You handled the initial trauma as well as you could have. Any behavior that came thereafter was a result either of neglected trauma earlier in life or an inability to cope. Neither of which you could have changed. I hope you're doing well now. Medical student here. Helped do chest compressions on a code blue once. Was fairly routine code, just chest compressions for about 45 minutes on an elderly man who had a history of heart problems. Eventually they called the code because he didn't have a shockable rhythm. The horrific part wasn't seeing a patient die in a code. That part is almost routine because of how rare it is to actually get someone back after chest compressions start. The horrific part was walking out into the hallway and seeing the patient's entire family huddled together, embracing each other, and just bawling their eyes out. It wasn't the usual sad cry someone has. It was a hysterical, disturbed cry of just emotional pain. One that you never want to hear, and one that is still haunting to think about. That was incredibly difficult to watch. I had to step away from the rounding team so they didn't see me cry. The worst part about doing compressions on an older person is listening to and feeling every rib and bone they have in their chest breaking. In some ways you almost hope they stay dead. In most cases they do. What really stuck with me was the noise. There was this distinct sucking noise from the throat that really stuck with me. This for me was not horrific, but the saddest thing to see. My mom trying to speak while on her deathbed. She seemed adamant and that it was very important for me to understand her, but she didn't have the strength. Holding her hand and wiping her tears away while her eyes turned pale. She took her last breath and she was gone. Cancer sucks. My wife died of metastatic cancer that spread to her brain. Over just a few weeks' time she went from lucid to uncommunicative due to the tumors damaging the language centers of her brain. There were a few weeks where she formed nonsense sentences that made perfect sense to her. Bring me my far colors meant that she wanted me to bring her the veggie tray from the refrigerator. Eventually she had a mini stroke that turned off her speech center completely. It broke my heart. My heart aches for your loss. I don't know what I would do without my wife, or how I would deal with watching something like that. My wife is my soulmate. She has been my rock. If you haven't already started living again, please do so. I'm sure your wife would want you to go on. A poor little cat who just been hit by a car, convulsing horribly in the ditch. He was dead by the time I made it the short distance over there. There was blood coming out of his mouth, and one of his eyes had popped out of the socket. I've seen some absolute shit on the internet, but that beats it all out. I had to pick up a dead kitten that was run over in the street in front of my house. The kitten felt so heavy, but they were so small. Oh no, that's awful. I'm so sorry. When I was younger, we had an outside cat in the neighborhood who I was close to. We called him Bubba. One day after returning from school, I was playing outside in my front yard and saw him. My family and I lived by a highway, and he was trying to cross it from the other side, and as he did, was hit by a large black truck. As soon as it happened I went running to my parents and told them about it, and they didn't believe me. It took me at least 30 minutes of crying and trying to drag them outside to look. At first from the front yard, they said it wasn't him, but I knew it was. Eventually they decided to drive over, taking me with them to go take a closer look. And like I had said before, it was him. The way the truck hit him caused his throat to split open, and you could see the muscle and whatnot bulging out. It wasn't something I wanted to see, or ever want to see again. Why did your parents not believe you? Because there were quite a few cats in the area that were stray, and they thought that I had saw one of them. Me and a friend were going to a bar that was off the side of a multi-lane highway. We parked on the street, and I was standing on the sidewalk looking at my friend who was standing behind her car, talking on the phone with another friend trying to figure out where they were. Out of nowhere she grabs my shirt and yanks me toward her into the highway, and in slow motion I see this huge truck flying down the sidewalk. ricocheting between the cars parked and the fence. We dove into the concrete and heard the truck come to a final crash. I was in shock as we picked ourselves up. I was speechless. My friend, however, was just pissed and screaming at the truck. A pole from the fence had managed to whack her in the leg. Nothing serious, but it hurt. I just silently watched as the man in the truck, with a front end now wrapped around a phone pole, moved to the passenger's side and slowly got out of the truck. People started to pour out of the bar, and I heard the blood-curdling screams. I tracked him with laser focus as he tried to blend in with the crowd. But then I saw it. The mangled body of a girl, laying right in front of the bar in trance. Brain everywhere. I was sick. When the police arrived, I immediately pointed out the driver, and me and my friend filled out reports. My friend saved my life. But the girl, who I later learned was sitting on a bench on the sidewalk waiting for a DD, was not so lucky. Dude is in prison for a long time. Oh my god, that's horrible. I can't imagine almost dying and then witnessing the aftermath. I'm assuming the driver was drunk to have caused all that. I've witnessed some pretty messed up stuff, but this was the most horrific to me psychologically and emotionally. A close friend and I found another one of our friends dead, odd in the backseat of his truck. Called the authorities. Was made to stand around for about an hour and a half waiting for detectives to question me. While waiting, I was sitting on a rock nearby, and I had to watch one by one as his lifelong friends came to see the body. He lived with them. The pure grief and pain of the cries that came out of those people as they each peeked in the backseat was horrific. I wanted to leave so badly, but I had to wait for the detectives to question me, because it turns out he was somewhere else. They panicked out of fear and moved his body to where we discovered it. I will never forget the sound and the look on their face as their body gave itself up to grief, as they crumpled down into a heap of despair. R.I.P. Dave. Real homie. Hey, sorry to bother you, but what did you mean by odd? If you don't wanna explain, that's fine. I understand. Overdosed. I.e. took more than safe amount of drugs. I was bored and tried using Omegle. I haven't really done that often since middle school. Since I didn't want to see nudity, I used the moderated chat. After just a couple of cams, I saw the horrific sight of some guy raping a very young girl. I immediately closed the chat and almost threw up. After a while, I was able to think clearly. I called a friend of mine who's a cop and reported it to the police. Haven't really heard anything about it since then. That was pretty much the most horrific thing I have ever seen, and it pretty much plagued me for days. And even now, just thinking about it makes me feel sick. I grew up during the age of Napster and Kazaa. A lot of videos on there were just child abuse videos labeled as other things. I've also seen horrible things that are still burned in my brain over 20 years later. I haven't ever spoken about it to anyone because I'm afraid they'll think I liked it or something. Really wish I could talk to a therapist about it. Why can't you talk to a therapist? If you get a chance to, you definitely should. When I saw the wreckage my 17-year-old son died in after crashing into a tree, the part that is horrific isn't about the crunched up hunk of metal. It was the lack of blood inside the car. Yeah, I saw pieces of my son's brain, but hardly any. What the officer said is the part that is horrific. The lack of blood means he died instantly and likely without pain. That's fantastic. And horrible. It's horrific. That's horrible. I'm really sorry. I hope you find some comfort in knowing he passed without any pain. Honestly, that is the only comfort, and it still lacks. Thanks. Hey, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more daily Reddit videos.